Imagine a river, not a still puddle, but a vast, powerful current. A river that moves with relentless energy, carving its path through solid earth over millennia. If you could somehow stand at the water's edge and observe it, what would you see? You would see constant movement. Objects bobbing downstream never stay in the same spot twice. The water itself is always shifting, changing molecules, reshaping the riverbed with every passing second. This is the imagery that haunted a great mind from ancient Greece, the thought of Heraclitus. The central paradox he proposed was breathtaking in its simplicity. You can never step into the same river twice, because even as your foot touches the water, the current has already moved it beneath you. By the time you lift your foot and prepare for the next step, the whole scene has changed again. You are touching something entirely new. This wasn't just a clever riddle. It was an observation about the fundamental nature of existence itself. For us human beings, this idea of ceaseless flux is often profoundly uncomfortable. We build our lives around the desire for permanence. We crave anchors, stable careers, unchanging friendships, enduring identities that we can rely on when the world feels overwhelming. Our minds naturally seek patterns and fixed points to create a sense of safety in a chaotic cosmos. We collect memories like precious artifacts, believing that by holding them fast enough, we can recreate a perfect moment, trapping time itself within the solid enclosure of nostalgia. We build narratives about who we were, the student, the devoted friend, the survivor, and these stories become the foundation upon which we try to stand still. But Heraclitus reminds us that story itself is just one fleeting chapter in an endless scroll. This realization forces us into a difficult, uncomfortable introspection. If nothing remains fixed, then what is solid? Are we condemned to live in perpetual disorientation? Do our ambitions become meaningless when the goalposts are always moving? This questioning of stability was once seen as a purely destabilizing philosophical argument. It threatened the very bedrock of certainty that civilizations depend upon. Yet, to merely observe change is not the same as being swept away by it. The challenge, then, lies in finding a way to reconcile this roaring dynamism with our inherent human need for meaning and coherence. How do we function day to day, making plans, building relationships, defining ourselves, if every single element, the water, the mind, the heart, is in constant motion? It feels like trying to cup running water in cupped hands. The effort of holding is what makes you feel the loss. In our daily lives, we encounter resistance constantly. We resist falling in love because commitment means giving up a degree of independence. We resist change at work, even when the job becomes stale, because the familiar structure, even if flawed, feels like safety. We resist healing from past hurts, clinging instead to the sharp edges of those old wounds. This powerful instinct to cling is perhaps our deepest, most human attempt to master time itself. We would rather suffer in a predictable pain than face an unpredictable freedom. The philosopher's wisdom does not tell us that change is easy. It simply names it as the law of the universe. Our job is not to stop the river from flowing, a futile task, impossible even for us to truly achieve. Instead, the first lesson we must internalize is acceptance of the flow itself. We must learn to discard the fantasy of the fixed moment. The self-examining mind, in this context, becomes a kind of disciplined watchtower situated beside the river. It does not try to dam the current, it simply observes it. It watches thoughts, the sudden worry about tomorrow, the sharp pang of regret from yesterday, as they rush past, noting their form and direction without engaging them. These thoughts are merely momentary splashes on the surface, ripples that quickly dissipate, never forming a permanent river itself. They come and go, like clouds passing across a vast, indifferent sky. The great struggle, then, is not with the world outside us, but with the internal resistance to impermanence. We fight change, the loss of a person, the end of an era, the shift in our own physical selves, as if this pain proves that the change is fundamentally wrong or unjust. But what if the very act of resisting the current creates more turmoil than the current itself? Imagine standing against a powerful tide. You expend all your energy simply maintaining that stubborn position, tired and breathless, only to realize that by yielding slightly, you could move with the flow effortlessly and reach a calmer shore. To truly see the river as it is, a perpetual state of becoming, is to grant permission for things to be different from what they were yesterday. It means understanding that nothing has the moral right to remain static when existence itself demands motion. This acceptance is not resignation. Rather, it is a profound intellectual freedom. It liberates us from the tyrannical weight of expectation, both our own and society's. Our identity, too, must be understood through this lens. We are not fixed entities defined by past achievements or predictable failures. We are the continuous summation of all moments lived, observed, adapted to, and flowed through. We are motion itself, momentarily organized into a single consciousness that experiences the passage of time. To live with awareness of Heraclitus's paradox is to shed the burdensome mantle of the way things were. It requires us to become perpetual students, always asking not just what we know, but how much we are about to unlearn. The wisdom is not in finding a solid ground to stand on, but in developing the inner musculature necessary to pivot, balance, and move gracefully when the unexpected tide inevitably comes. The river does not care if you fall into it. It simply flows. And by accepting its indifference, we finally free ourselves from our own self-imposed terror of change. If the river always moves, then how can we ever claim a single moment of permanence? We spend so much of our lives trying to build dams against the ceaseless tide. We collect memories, we cling to certain identities, and we structure our routines as if they were stone foundations in a shifting marsh. But Heraclitus taught us a profound truth. Stability itself is an illusion. The very thing we seek most, the certainty of self, the guarantee of tomorrow, is constantly dissolving into change. Look at your hands. Even now, writing these words, the muscle memory that guides my pen and the physical reality of this page are themselves in flux. Our desire for permanence often stems from a deep discomfort with impermanence. We want our emotions to settle into reliable states, happy all the time, or sad always, or successful consistently. But life refuses to give us such simple predictability. The human heart is not designed to accept perpetual motion. It struggles against it. This resistance becomes one of the greatest sources of our inner suffering. We naturally want a fixed point, a moment we can point to and say, this is it, the stable self that remains untouched by time. We build narratives about who we were yesterday or who we hope to be tomorrow, using these imagined anchors to steady the tumultuous waters of now. But what happens when those anchors fail? When memories blur, when roles change, when unexpected grief arrives, do we feel ourselves floating away without solid ground? The great challenge here is accepting that time does not treat things as if they were photographically still. It treats them like flowing water. If you try to bottle the flow of a river into an airtight jar, the very act of containment changes its nature. By trying desperately to freeze a feeling, say perfect happiness or justified anger, we only trap and intensify it until it breaks the glass. Consider the myth of Sisyphus, condemned to eternally push a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down. His struggle is not merely physical. It is a metaphor for our own internal battles against what naturally is. We wage constant, exhausting wars with the reality of flow. We tell ourselves, this time was better, or I should have stayed in that situation because at least I knew the rules. These desires are acts of resisting the natural pattern of change, and this resistance is a powerful source of anguish. The wisdom we seek is therefore not found in achieving permanence, because it does not exist, but in mastering the art of suspension. It means recognizing that the self is not a fixed object, but rather the act of observing. You are not the thoughts passing through your mind, you are the awareness of them. This subtle distinction allows us to observe our internal struggle with compassion and detachment. We mistake transient ripples, a sudden wave of fear, an old resentment surfacing, a flicker of joy, for solid facts about who we fundamentally are. But like reflections on water, they pass. They possess form for a moment, demanding attention, yet they hold no lasting substance. The true self, the observer, remains steady, unmoved by the currents that sweep through its mind. To truly move with the flow, we must learn to discard the necessity of absolute resolution. We accept that being is synonymous with becoming. Our life is not a completed statue. It is a sculpture perpetually carved from moving clay. This perspective shifts our relationship with adversity. Conflict ceases to be something external happening to us. Instead, conflict becomes simply part of the process of movement itself, a necessary tension in the rhythm of existence. The goal is not merely survival within change. It is learning to dance within it. It is recognizing that by grasping at yesterday's certainty or projecting too forcefully into tomorrow's illusion, we are only exhausting ourselves against nature's most fundamental principle, flux. True freedom begins when we cease the futile battle against the tide and instead learn to ride its immense power, knowing that in yielding, we find our deepest strength. This perpetual dance is not chaotic. It is the cosmic order itself, the underlying pattern or logos directing everything from the slightest breath to the grand sweep of history. We have spent time pondering the great river of change, accepting that to fight its current is simply to exhaust ourselves. We understand now that existence itself is a magnificent, constant process of becoming. But there is a trap even the most reflective mind can fall into. It is the seductive habit of resistance, the struggle for control. We often view our lives as if they were supposed to adhere to some predictable script. Our memories cling to moments we desperately want to keep fixed: the perfect relationship, the successful career, the sense of self that felt permanent at age 20. We build mental walls against anything unpredictable because stability feels safer than flux. This deep-seated need for stasis is perhaps our most profound and persistent form of suffering. It forces us to confront a reality that refuses to cooperate. Nothing remains exactly the same, even in the quiet sanctuary of the self. Our attempts to glue down our identity, to hold onto the shape of who we were yesterday, are acts of painful futility. The philosophical cost of this resistance is enormous. We find ourselves constantly battling what has already passed and fighting against what is inevitably approaching. If a job ends, we do not merely grieve the loss. We resist the concept of change itself, clinging to the imagined comfort of the old routine. If a relationship softens, we fight its natural drift, desperately trying to force it back into an earlier, more predictable form. This internal battle is far more taxing than any outward circumstance. The pain does not come from the departure. It comes from the refusal to accept that departure. It comes from insisting that things ought to be different than they are. We are fighting a current with our own minds, exhausting ourselves in hypothetical battles. The wisest mind understands that resistance is merely clinging to an illusion of permanence. When we resist the flow, we amplify the pain. The disappointment is not truly caused by the failed exam or the empty chair. It is caused by our refusal to acknowledge the necessity of the attempt or the necessary absence. Consider the way a riverbed responds to obstruction. If you place a stone in its path, the water does not simply stop. It changes course. It exerts pressure around the sides of the stone, finding new vulnerabilities and paths of least resistance. The energy that was dedicated to brute force against the rock is instead redirected, shaping the environment around it. Our lives are much like this flowing riverbed. When we encounter a setback, a rejection, an unforeseen failure, a profound disagreement, our natural instinct is often to push back with immense emotional effort. We build dams of denial or walls of victimhood. But these efforts only achieve one thing. They drain us completely and ultimately fail to change the direction of the flow. They merely create stagnation in localized areas, which breeds deeper bitterness. The work, therefore, must shift from fighting the current to observing the point of friction itself. We must become keenly aware of the precise moment when our thoughts turn into stubborn protest. That is the moment we are wasting energy. Imagine your mind not as a solid structure, but as a shallow pool reflecting everything that moves above it. When you confront change, your immediate reaction is to treat the passing thought, the fear, the regret, the accusation, as an undeniable fact about yourself or your reality. You solidify it, giving it weight and permanence. This leads to suffering. The gentle corrective action, however, is profound detachment from those self-imposed narrative structures. The memory that haunts you was a vivid moment, but it is not the final definition of who you are now. The resentment you feel towards someone else is a powerful emotion, yes, but it is merely an observation passing through your consciousness, not a permanent state of being. The struggle for control is rooted in our deep-seated desire to be protected from unpredictability. We crave safety above all else. Yet, true freedom, the Stoic ideal, is found precisely in embracing the unpredictable. It requires trust. Trust in the natural rhythm of life and trust in the resilience of the self that observes these cycles. Learning to surrender one's need for mastery is not a failure. It is the ultimate act of power. It means accepting what cannot be changed, not out of resignation, but out of enlightened recognition. It means moving from the aggressive stance of I must control this outcome to the receptive posture of how shall I respond with wisdom and strength to whatever arrives. This shift in focus is revolutionary. It turns the painful energy of resistance, the anger at injustice, the sadness over lost time, the anxiety about tomorrow, into pure observational fuel. We stop fighting the wave and instead learn to understand the physics of its power. The force that previously built dams now nourishes our ability to move with grace. The struggle for control becomes the practice field for true self-mastery. We must recognize that pain is not inflicted by events. It is generated by our stories about those events. And by choosing a new story, one of adaptability and acceptance, we diminish its power instantly. We are learning to be passengers on life's great river, understanding that the most beautiful journeys are those where the destination is constantly redefined by the water itself. If the previous chapters taught us that resistance to change is our greatest source of suffering, then what does true mastery look like? It looks not like a rigid wall built against the river, but like the graceful surrender to its power. If we are continually fighting the wave, exhausting ourselves in the effort to stand still, we only end up battered on the rocks of inevitability. We must learn something profound. We must learn to surf the current. The act of surfing is not about conquering the ocean. It is about aligning with the movement of the water itself. Think of a massive wave arriving. It is immense power, capable of overwhelming everything in its path. Our initial instinct is often fear, and that fear translates into brute force. We paddle against the incoming swell, trying to fight its momentum. This effort, though born of conviction or desperation, only drains us faster than the water can lift us. We are exhausted before we even reach the crest. To truly ride a wave, you must first become aware of it. You do not try to generate the power, you anticipate it. You feel the swell beneath your board, recognizing that force is already present in nature's rhythm. The secret lies in yielding the struggle and finding the point of least resistance. When you are no longer fighting the energy, but instead guiding yourself with it, suddenly, the sheer momentum becomes not a threat, but an ally. You utilize the water's power to propel you forward, effortlessly covering distances that seemed impossible when facing head-on. The philosophical implication here is vast and transformative. Our lives are not meant to be fought, they are meant to be navigated. The challenges we face, a sudden loss of job, the dissolution of a deep relationship, the shattering of a fixed belief system, these are simply the waves arriving. They carry immense power and often feel terrifyingly overwhelming. Our initial impulse is always to dig in our heels, declaring that this must not happen, or that things must return to how they were. This desperate grip on stability is precisely what causes us to lose balance. The Stoic wisdom reminds us that the highest form of control is self-control, not over events, but over our reaction to them. If we stop treating life as a series of emergencies to be countered and start viewing it instead as an ongoing cycle of energy, of rises and falls, tensions and releases, a profound shift occurs. We move from being mere passengers reacting violently to external forces to becoming skilled participants who understand the inherent rhythm of existence. Learning to surf requires observation above all else. You must be acutely present in the moment preceding the wave. This is not merely about looking at the water. It is a deep internal stillness that allows you to read the energy patterns, to feel where the swell is building, how quickly it will crest, and what its eventual shape will be. This readiness, this receptive posture, becomes our most powerful tool. In life terms, recognizing the rhythm of change means acknowledging the universal nature of impermanence without falling into despair over it. It teaches us that struggle itself has a pattern. There are quiet descents, building tensions, and inevitable moments of cresting power. To live in this flow state is to cultivate an inner balance where we can accept both the peak excitement and the troughs of calm simply as parts of the same journey. We begin to understand that the best strategy is often not confrontation, but alignment. Instead of saying, "This current should stop," or "I cannot handle this much change," we learn to whisper instead, "With what power am I moving with right now?" This subtle shift in questioning redirects our focus from the painful resistance to the functional reality of the flow. The difficulty is integrating this philosophy into the messy reality of human emotion. When the wave hits, when the loss, the disappointment, or the unexpected failure arrives, the body remembers fighting. The mind clings to old patterns of denial and control. We tell ourselves stories about permanence. "I was successful last year," or "this relationship meant everything." These narratives are powerful anchors, but they are also ballast. They weigh us down when the current shifts. The skill, then, is acknowledging that story without letting it define your present capability. It means looking at the crashing wave and simply seeing energy moving from point A to point B. There is no judgment in the physics of water. There is only movement. Our minds must learn this non-judgmental observation. The moment we truly achieve this surrender, this genuine, active acceptance, We stop spending precious energy fighting what is and start redirecting it toward mastering how we are. We harness the surge of adrenaline that comes with crisis, not by bottling it up through resistance, but by using its raw power to fuel movement. We ride the discomfort until the discomfort passes, understanding that the emotional swell, too, will crest and recede. This practice, this surrenderize action, is how we achieve a kind of fluid strength. It is not the brittle, defensive strength of stone, but the resilient, adaptable force of water itself. We learn that by ceasing to resist the necessary friction, we gain momentum toward true self-mastery. The goal is simple: to move through life's current with the grace of a surfer who understands that the greatest power lies not in stopping the waves, but in finding their perfect rhythm. If the great philosopher Heraclitus taught us anything, it is that nothing ever remains still. It flows, it changes, moment by unending moment. We have spent this journey understanding how profoundly resistant we are to this fundamental truth. Our minds build dams against the river of time, desperate to categorize moments, solidify identities, and anchor memories in place, assuming stability is a reachable goal. But history, as Heraclitus taught us, is fundamentally characterized by flux. Everything that was must become what will be, leaving only the motion itself as constant. We have learned to ride the wave of external change, to surf the unexpected challenges life throws at us. This was mastering our response to other people and circumstances. But true mastery requires turning the gaze inward. We must now apply the principle of flow to the most unstable ground of all, our own perception, our inner world. Two is a river that refuses to settle into any solid banks. Consider the labels we use for ourselves: sad, unsuccessful, loved, misunderstood. These words feel solid when we repeat them enough times. They feel like permanent coordinates on a map of who we are. But if we apply the principle of constant becoming, if we treat our thoughts not as facts, but merely as viewpoints passing through the mind, they lose their power to define us. The thought "I am sad" is simply an observation. It describes a current emotion, much like noting the shade of light at dusk. It does not mandate permanence, nor does it dictate destiny. The human tendency is to treat mental states as solid entities. We mistake the intensity of a feeling for its immutability. When fear washes over us, we build around it a fortress of certainty that I will always feel this way or this failure defines me forever. This is the geometry of impermanence misunderstood, mistaking a geometric shape drawn on wet sand for the bedrock beneath. The mind, paradoxically, is often its own most relentless and cruel opponent. It constantly compares the current self to some idealized, permanent version that never existed. We compare the fleeting nature of our emotions today with the sturdy resolve we believed we possessed yesterday, feeling a profound sense of disappointing deviation. This internal friction, this gap between what was and what is becoming, is often where our deepest suffering lies. Learning to observe these thought patterns requires us to adopt a radical detachment, not in apathy, but in precision. We must become the self-examining consciousness that stands slightly apart from the stream of thoughts it observes. When an overwhelming idea arrives, do not engage with its content or its assumed permanence. Instead, treat it like noise, a sudden burst of static on a radio dial that will inevitably fade away if we simply refuse to tune into it. The key shift here is recognizing that becoming is the natural state of consciousness itself. To be conscious is to witness change. If our minds could find absolute stillness, they would cease to function as minds. Our inherent nature is motion. Therefore, when discomfort arises, a persistent worry, a recurring self-criticism, it should not be treated as an enemy force that must be conquered or suppressed. Rather, It is simply information. It is data about the current pattern of your mind's activity. We are learning to view these cycles of emotion and thought like atmospheric shifts. The anxiety is a high-pressure front moving through. The calm is merely a brief clearing in the clouds. They have a natural rhythm. Our task is not to force them away, but to recognize their pattern. They arrive, they peak, and then they subside, inevitably following the laws of energetic exchange. This understanding frees us from the burden of emotional ownership. You are not your sadness. You are the space in which sadness passes through. You are not your failure. You are the capacity for observation that notes the experience of failure. This separation, the profound gap between the observer and the observed content, is where true freedom resides. It is the realization that even our most defined beliefs, however deeply held they feel, are temporary arrangements of energy and perception. We begin to see that resistance isn't just about resisting external change. It is fundamentally about fighting the nature of thought itself. To fight a passing thought is like trying to hold back a tide with bare hands, an exhausting, futile endeavor that only leaves you depleted and battered by your own struggle. The strength lies in allowing the mind its full range of movement, trusting that just as all things flow downstream, eventually meeting the vast ocean, all transient thoughts will pass into the great nothingness of pure potentiality. This geometry of impermanence is not a philosophy of resignation. It is a framework for maximum engagement. It allows us to engage fully with life, with relationships, work, and purpose, because we are no longer burdened by the illusion that any current experience must maintain its intensity or duration forever. We can accept the joy as potent only because we know the inevitable arrival of its subtle decline, and we can meet suffering with compassion because we understand it too is a flowing wave destined to retreat. The truth whispered in the current is this: stability does not mean remaining fixed. It means becoming predictable in your response to ceaseless motion. It means mastering the art of simply letting things be exactly as they are, knowing that being is nothing more than the eloquent poetry of becoming. To embrace flux is to embrace life itself, pure and undiluted. We have spent chapters observing the mighty river, the universal flux described by Heraclitus. We learned that to try and build a dam against change is not merely futile. It drains us entirely. Our initial resistance, our profound struggle for certainty in a world built on movement, is exhausting. But accepting perpetual flow is one thing. Embodying that acceptance while still functioning effectively is another matter entirely. The river does not simply flow. It requires action. It has currents, it navigates obstacles, and sometimes those obstacles require powerful pushing against the current to find a new path around them. This brings us to the core paradox. How do we integrate complete surrender with purposeful engagement? How can we be utterly fluid, the master of going with the flow, and yet still exert the necessary force to carve out meaning? In our earlier reflections, we found strength in yielding. We practiced surfing the wave rather than fighting it. We learned that emotional resilience comes from observation alone. But life is not always a gentle current. Sometimes it demands focused, directed effort against a powerful inertia. This tension, this necessary friction between surrender and action, forms what was once considered the great paradox, the paradox of action and inaction. Consider the skilled craftsman. Imagine a potter throwing clay on a wheel. The act requires incredible internal contradiction. At one moment, the potter must maintain absolute stillness, a point of profound non-action where intent is purely focused. They are mentally blank, allowing the material to dictate its own form. This stillness is not emptiness, it is maximum presence. The body's hands, however, must then perform precise muscular actions. A slight push here, a gentle turn there. If they press too hard in one place, the beautiful form collapses into a mess. If they let go entirely, nothing happens. The greatest art exists precisely within this dynamic tension, the point where intense inaction fuels perfect action. The self operates much like that clay on the wheel. We wish to exist in a state of perpetual ease and non-resistance, a gentle glide downriver. But life presents us with challenges that demand the potter's touch, focused effort, deliberate shaping, and resisting the urge to simply float away. The philosophy suggests that neither pure inaction nor unrestrained action leads to genuine flourishing. Both extremes are incomplete. The stagnation of complete inaction is merely atrophy. It is comfortable but yields nothing new. Conversely, excessive action, driven by desperate attachment or fear, is simply frantic struggle, consuming energy without building lasting structure. Therefore, the path to strength lies in mastering that precise point of necessary tension. This is where true wisdom resides, knowing when to push with focused intention, and knowing precisely when that focus must dissolve entirely back into observation. We are learning to treat our actions not as definitive statements about who we are, but as temporary ripples created by a mindful self. Our inaction is equally valuable. It is the deep, spacious breath taken between waves, allowing clarity to return. The craftsman does not simply switch between stillness and motion. They exist in a constant oscillation between the two poles, understanding that one feeds the other. This concept asks us to view life's moments through the lens of necessary tension. Every period of rest must be coupled with a readiness for movement. Every demanding action requires an underlying capacity for perfect release. We cannot become masterful at navigating our internal landscape unless we accept that true stability is found not in remaining still, but in the reliable rhythm of alternating between intense focus and radical letting go. This oscillation is what gives life its meaning. It is the dance of becoming. It is the inherent logos, or cosmic order, that manifests through both effort and rest. The greatest difficulty lies in recognizing this shift when under pressure. When a crisis hits, our natural response is usually one of panic, leading to either frantic, ill-directed action or complete paralysis. We mistake these extremes for stability, but remember the potter's wheel. The purpose of life is not to remain solely on one side of the tension. It is to master the swing between them. It requires developing a sophisticated inner awareness, an ability to sense whether the situation demands the focused grip of the artisan or the fluid surrender of the observer. This acceptance of tension means embracing ambiguity. If everything were entirely resolved, if our emotional state was fixed, and our external circumstances were permanently stable, we would cease to grow. The necessary friction, therefore, is not an enemy to be eliminated. It is the very engine of development. It is the energy required for the next beautiful curve on the wheel. By understanding that action must always return to inaction in order to replenish its source, and by recognizing that observation itself is the most powerful form of non-action, we begin to live not just adaptively, but powerfully, embracing our nature as beings perpetually suspended between effort and surrender. We have explored the profound mystery of ceaseless flow. We learned that everything in existence is defined by movement. The river never stops, and the mind never rests. For so long, we have accepted this truth simply as an immutable fact. Life changes, therefore we must accept change. But acceptance alone can be passive. It suggests merely watching the current pass us by without understanding how to navigate its power. The true philosophy moves beyond mere resignation. Finding harmony is not about passively yielding to fate. It is about achieving a conscious alignment with nature's rhythm. To grasp this state, we must recognize where our energy leaks. When faced with inevitable change, a relationship fading, a career path shifting, an old belief crumbling, our natural impulse is resistance. We try to build dams against the flow. We clutch at what was solid yesterday, even if it dissolves by morning. This desperate grip is not only exhausting, it creates artificial conflict where none existed naturally. The goal of harmony, or harmonia in classical thought, is therefore not stillness. It is not the absence of struggle, but the skillful resolution of tension. Think of a deep bow that achieves its perfect curve not by stopping, but by embracing all opposing forces simultaneously. It must be taut and relaxed at once. This requires a fundamental shift from accepting what happens to understanding how we respond to what happens. We are moving past the simple idea of letting go and into the active principle of intelligent participation. It is realizing which currents genuinely belong to us, those aspects of our will, our intention, and our focus that can be molded by mindful effort, and recognizing those vast, powerful rivers that simply exist outside our control. The philosopher realizes this divide, the internal landscape versus the external ocean. We must cultivate a fierce loyalty to the self we choose to become, while remaining utterly humble before the sheer scale of reality's impermanence. We can influence our attitude, the intensity of our attention, and the depth of our acceptance. But we cannot dictate the actions of others or reverse the course of time. This is where active surrender resides. It sounds contradictory, perhaps even like giving up, but in fact, it is the ultimate act of power. It requires us to stop fighting against inevitability, allowing the sheer force of change, the wave's energy, to move through us rather than trying to block its path. Imagine a skilled sailor caught in a storm. His first instinct might be panic, an attempt to forcefully row back against the immense power of the wind and water. This effort is suicidal. True mastery comes when he stops fighting the gale. Instead, he learns to read the pressure points, adjust the angle of the sail perfectly to catch the prevailing force, and allow the ship to be propelled by the elements themselves. His struggle transforms into a sophisticated dance with power. The balance point is found in this knowledgeable dancing. It is the exquisite tension between rigid preparation and yielding flexibility. We must study every predictable pattern, the rhythm of our own breath, the rising and falling of emotion, the cyclical nature of any endeavor. Understanding these patterns allows us to anticipate where resistance will be most costly. They ask, if change is necessary, isn't struggle always inevitable? Yes, but philosophy teaches that the quality of the struggle is entirely ours to determine. We can transform friction from a source of pain into a source of information. Conflict is not an attack on our worth. It is merely data point indicating misalignment. It shows us where we are fixed, and therefore where we must gently pivot. To achieve harmonia, we must become observers who participate gracefully. We observe the emotional turmoil, the sudden burst of jealousy, the wave of frustration, and instead of immediately reacting from a place of defense, we pause. That pause is our sacred territory. It is the space between stimulus and response, the gap where choice resides. It is in this disciplined pause that the power to choose begins. We are not free because things stop changing. We are free because we can choose how we engage with change's perpetual motion. This commitment to observation elevates us from mere participants in life's river flow to conscious navigators of it. The true strength, therefore, is the ability to maintain a state of dynamic equilibrium. It is being deeply committed to our principles and our goals, a point of stable internal reference, while remaining totally unattached to the specific outcomes that external forces will deliver. We pour our best effort into the present task, knowing that the results are merely ripples upon an ever-moving surface. This balance point is a continuous act. It requires us always to check for rigidity, to question any fixed belief about ourselves or others, and to remember that attachment to form, whether emotional, material, or intellectual, inevitably leads back to frustration and pain. We are meant not to be static monuments to our own history, but fluid rivers of continuous becoming, embracing the glorious motion of life itself. If the physical river is a perfect metaphor for change, then our minds must be infinitely more volatile. The water flowing past us has countless ripples, each one unique and passing. If we spent all our energy trying to fix those ripples in place, or desperately clinging to them, we would drown in our own thoughts. We have journeyed far already, learning that resistance is exhausting, a futile damming of the inevitable current. Now, we must turn the lens entirely inward. The subject of this philosophy is no longer the external world, but the landscape within us, the constant, churning reality of consciousness itself. The great challenge presented by Heraclitus was to accept that nothing remains fixed. We learned that being is always merely becoming. But what does it mean when we apply this principle not just to seasons or rivers, but to the delicate structure of our own thoughts and emotional selves? It means recognizing that the deepest source of suffering is often the illusion of internal permanence, the belief that there exists a fixed version of you that is permanently sad, or permanently successful, or permanently angry. This perceived stable self, this inner core we try so hard to protect, is in fact subject to the same relentless flow as any external river. We are accustomed to narratives about ourselves. We construct stories. I am a hardworking person. I am someone who deserves happiness. I am fragile today because of what happened yesterday. These narratives feel solid, don't they? They give us identity and coherence. They provide the necessary anchors in life's vast, shifting sea. Yet, like any anchor, when it is fixed too tightly to a truth that changes with the tide, it only causes pain. The self-concept itself becomes another object of attachment, leading us into a secondary round of struggle against natural human evolution. The core practice, then, must be one of radical detachment from our own mental narratives. We must learn to separate the observer from the observed content. The thought that flashes through your mind, the memory of failure, the dread of tomorrow, the criticism directed at you. This thought is not a solid fact about who you are. It is merely a ripple passing across the surface of your awareness. You are the vast, quiet lake. The thoughts are just the momentary disturbances on its skin. Think of your mind as an inner landscape that is perpetually shifting, always undergoing geological change. Sometimes there are valleys of despair. Sometimes there are peaks of exuberant joy. These highs and lows do not define the mountain itself. They are temporary weather patterns passing over a resilient core. Our natural human inclination is to give weight to these emotional storm systems. We say, I am sadness, or I am fear. And in doing so, we build an architectural edifice of self-definition out of temporary mood states. This gives the mood state immense power and makes it feel unbreakable. The master of internal landscapes does not try to eliminate the storms or suppress the valleys. Such attempts are merely more acts of resistance, adding another layer of effortful control on top of an already fluid existence. Instead, mastery lies in developing a steady, non-judgmental awareness, a silent witness consciousness. This witnessing is simply noticing that thought X has arrived, observing it, and then noting that thought X has passed. There are no good thoughts or bad thoughts. There is only the constant emergence and dissolution of mental patterns. This practice is deeply counterintuitive to our survival instincts. Our evolutionary wiring pushes us toward consistency. Predict the threat, reinforce the belief, repeat the identity. The modern self, however, must learn a different imperative. Embrace inconsistency as the source of profound strength. The greatest power lies not in solidifying who you are, but in realizing how much space there is between who you think you are and what you truly are, which is nothing more than awareness itself. To stabilize the observer means that when the internal tide rises with crippling fear, or recedes into deep numbness, the core observing mechanism remains unperturbed. It continues to simply observe. Ah, here is a wave of fear. It has cresting, and now it must fall. This recognition detaches you from the emotional event. You are not the emotion. You are the empty space in which the emotion appears. The journey through internal landscapes demands relentless self-honesty. We will inevitably catch ourselves fabricating narratives for comfort, telling ourselves that we must be struggling, or that we must achieve perfection, simply because accepting neutral flow feels terrifyingly unstructured. Every time you notice the subtle temptation to label, every time you feel the urge to grasp a feeling as if it were permanent truth, acknowledge it and let it pass. This act of noticing is the fundamental shift in power dynamics within your own psyche. Ultimately, what we seek here is not stasis, nor even ecstatic joy. It is something far more subtle, radical, unburdened presence. It is settling into the rhythm of perpetual becoming. To master the internal landscape is to understand that you are fundamentally free from being owned by your thoughts. You are the boundless light shining upon the momentary flickerings of consciousness. This understanding does not eliminate conflict. It simply changes where you stand relative to the conflict, granting a profound and liberating distance. The flow continues. Your only task is to remain with the current of awareness itself, accepting that the self you knew yesterday and the version you hope to be tomorrow are both just passing manifestations of pure becoming. We have spent this journey tracing the ceaseless movement of existence. We learned that everything flows, that nothing remains still forever. From the rushing river to the shifting patterns of thought, constant change has been our fundamental reality. Yet, it is precisely this realization that creates the deepest human tension, a desire for anchors, for solid ground beneath our feet and in our minds. We spent time observing the illusion of permanence, recognizing that memories, stable identities, and past narratives are merely snapshots, temporary viewpoints captured on the current of becoming. True freedom, we have seen, is not found in arresting change, but in accepting it utterly. To this understanding, however, brings a profound philosophical challenge. If all friction is necessary for motion, what does that mean for us? We often approach conflict, difficulty, and emotional pain as something external to be eliminated or overcome entirely. We see them as antagonists, obstacles blocking our desired path toward a state of perfect peace or stable achievement. But the ancient wisdom suggests a radical redefinition. It proposes that friction itself is not an enemy. It is the very energy source for growth. We have traced the invisible current that drives all things. We learned that stability is a myth, and permanence is an elegant illusion designed to make us feel safe while keeping us stuck. The rivers flow, thoughts pass. Life simply becomes a sequence of moments without visible borders. This realization, this acceptance that everything is always moving, can be both profoundly liberating and deeply unsettling. It forces us to dismantle our dearest anchors, the belief in who we were yesterday, the certainty of how things should remain tomorrow. If nothing remains fixed, then where do we build our sense of self? This question haunts the perpetual student, for the wisdom of a journey is not found at the peak of some achieved summit, but in the willingness to keep walking without knowing the final destination. It is housed within the humility of never believing that one has arrived anywhere definitive. The greatest danger after grasping the flux is becoming arrogant about our understanding. We might start clinging to philosophical concepts as if they were solid objects, a theory of flow, a framework for being, and treating them like unshakable truths about reality. Yet, just like the self-imposed labels we discarded earlier, these conceptual structures are themselves transient viewpoints. The true student understands that knowledge is not ownership. Knowledge is merely a current of inquiry. It is the delightful tension between what we perceive as fact and the overwhelming recognition of how little we truly know. The perpetual learner knows that wisdom is an emptying, a continual clearing out of assumptions so that new light can enter. Consider the nature of true understanding. If you stop learning, if your mind settles into comfort, if you become satisfied with its current knowledge, you cease to be receptive. You begin to resist what lies beyond the comfortable edges of your knowing. This is a subtle form of stagnation, far more insidious than any dramatic setback. The wisdom that must accompany the understanding of perpetual flow is therefore radical curiosity. It demands that we approach every single day, every conversation, and every apparent certainty with a kind of childlike awe. The perpetual student does not bring solutions, they bring questions. They do not demand answers, they savor the unfolding mystery. This requires a constant internal reorientation. We must cultivate an awareness that keeps us perpetually open to being wrong, to having our foundational assumptions challenged, and to adopting new perspectives even when those perspectives are uncomfortable or confusing. Error is not merely something to be avoided. It is often the most vital mechanism of growth itself. If we never make a mistake, if we always confirm what we already think is true, then our movement stops. Our potential for becoming withers. The challenge shifts from mastering external circumstances to mastering internal posture. The greatest conflict is waged when the ego fears the vacuum that comes with profound understanding. When we realize the infinite nature of flux, our small, solid sense of self can feel terrifyingly tenuous, like a soap bubble ready to burst at the slightest touch. This fear makes us grasp back, creating resistance where there should only be flow. To embody the wisdom of perpetual learning is thus to practice non-attachment, not just from outcomes, but from our own accumulated ideas about ourselves and the world. It means walking with an open hand, ready to receive contradictory evidence, willing to listen deeply to dissenting voices, and treating our deepest convictions as hypotheses rather than decrees. The student who understands flux does not seek definitive answers. They cultivate fluency in asking better questions. They accept that their identity is not built upon a stable set of knowledge, but on the elegant capacity to adapt and inquire. This realization transforms vulnerability into resilience, because one can lose everything and still have the ability to ask, "What now?" This endless state of becoming is itself the ultimate destination, for it means that life's value lies not in arrival, but entirely in the perpetual act of movement. We are meant to be travelers, seekers, always looking over the horizon of our own potential. And in embracing this infinite voyage of curiosity and self-questioning, we finally achieve a deep, resilient kind of peace, the peace of having nothing truly fixed to lose, because everything is already destined to move. We have spent many chapters understanding that nothing remains fixed. We know that change is the fundamental nature of existence. Yet even when our minds grasp this great truth, that we are always moving, always becoming, we often find ourselves desperately clutching at what was. We build anchors out of yesterday's memories, solidifying them as proof of who we were or who we deserve to be. These anchors, though meant to give us safety and definition, ultimately hold us captive to a past that no longer exists. The self-examination reveals that much of our pain is not caused by the current flux itself, but by the refusal to release what we imagine was solid yesterday. Consider the mental weight we carry, the regrets about choices made, the lingering affections for versions of people who are gone, or the ghosts of moments that passed us by. These recollections become emotional anchors. We treat them not as fleeting lessons learned from a river current, but as immutable facts defining our identity. This is the deepest form of internal resistance to life's beautiful movement. It demands that we pause time, demanding permanence in an inherently impermanent world. And clinging to this illusion is exhausting. To let go of yesterday's anchor is not an act of forgetting. It is an act of profound self-liberation. It is the understanding that the person who experienced those regrets, or the life defined by that past mistake, was a version of yourself best served by their own trajectory. They were necessary stages, lessons written in passing rivers of time. But they are not your permanent residence. We must learn to distinguish between remembering and repeating. Remembering is an act of wisdom. It informs our present choices. Repeating is allowing the emotional residue of yesterday to dictate the urgency or despair of today's moments. To truly let go means acknowledging the lessons, the valuable knowledge gained from that anchor's weight, and then gracefully cutting the line. Think of a riverbank where an old, heavy boat is tied up. The owner might keep checking it, worrying if the current will scrape it, or if its perfect position was lost. But the river itself does not care about the boat's stationary desire for stasis. It simply flows around and past it. Our internal landscape must become like that riverbank, observing the boats of our emotions drift by without needing to anchor ourselves to them. The weight of what could have been is often heavier than the reality of what currently is. We romanticize endings, believing that some memories are too beautiful or wounds too significant to ever change. But holding onto a perceived tragedy keeps us in mourning for the event, rather than fully living the recovery. True emotional maturity arrives when we accept that all chapters close and must yield the way for the next ink to flow. This process of detaching is not achieved through denial or forced optimism. It is found in gentle acceptance, an acknowledgement that things are changing, and therefore some versions of us must also change. The self must shed its dependence on a solid, predictable past self. We realize that our strength does not come from preserving what was stable, but from mastering the grace required to pivot when stability dissolves. The work here is one of gentle severance. When you feel the pull backward, the nostalgia for an easier time, the guilt over a foregone chance, pause and simply observe it. Name the sensation. This is the anchor. Observe its grip without judging it as good or bad. Treat it like a heavy object that belongs to someone else, something that once held your boat but no longer needs you. By viewing those past emotional ties through this detached lens of pure observation, their power begins to diminish. We are not defined by the trajectory we wish we had taken. We are defined by our capacity to continue moving forward. The self is inherently fluid, always receiving the next stream of experience. We must grant ourselves permission to be imperfectly continuous, to be constantly forming and reforming. To carry the memory is fine, but to let the memory become the primary source of your current emotional energy is where the cage is built. The ultimate freedom, therefore, is found in accepting that every moment carries no power over your present breath. The past taught you. It does not command you. Releasing yesterday's anchors allows you to move through life with a lightness, a profound receptivity, to greet whatever currents the day brings, knowing you are built for motion. You become less defined by what you endured, and more defined by the unstoppable act of your own continuous becoming. We have spent many chapters observing the relentless rhythm of flux. We have learned that trying to grasp anything, be it a perfect memory, an unchangeable identity, or a static relationship, is like grasping smoke. You only pull air through your fingers. The fundamental truth offered by Heraclitus remains: nothing is ever fixed. Everything flows. Yet this understanding can feel paralyzing. If the ground beneath us is always shifting, how do we build a life? How do we plan, love, or even decide what to believe? Our human nature naturally craves certainty. We want anchors, things that remain reliably solid so that we know where we stand and who we are tomorrow. This need for stability is not a weakness. It is a deeply ingrained impulse toward order. But when the natural state of existence is movement, this craving creates profound internal friction. It becomes a gentle but persistent conflict between what must be and what we desperately wish to hold on to. In previous chapters, we focused much on accepting external currents, the inevitable shift in jobs, the fading of friendships, or the changing tides of fortune. But the final great lesson must turn the gaze inward, focusing the philosophy of flow upon our own relationships with others, and critically on ourselves. We are moving beyond mere acceptance towards skill, the art of the gentle pivot. The gentle pivot is not giving up. It is mastering graceful responsiveness. It is understanding that life's greatest strength comes not from rigid adherence to a plan, but from perfecting the act of adjustment itself. Imagine walking through a vast, beautiful landscape where paths occasionally fade or cross unexpectedly. The most powerful traveler is not the one who insists on taking the original path, but the one who can read the subtle shift in topography and change direction with poise, without hesitation, and without looking back at what was lost. This pivot requires us to distinguish between a mere setback and an inherent redirection. A setback implies failure, a deviation from a perfect trajectory. A true redirection, however, is simply life revealing its next necessary course. When we confuse the two, we create needless suffering. We mourn the should-have-been moment instead of fully embodying the reality of the is. Consider our goals and ambitions. Many people treat their aspirations as if they were carved into stone tablets, absolute, eternal, unbreakable commitments. Yet, life itself rarely respects such permanence. A promising career path can dry up due to economic shifts. A deeply loved relationship may naturally drift apart not through malice, but simply because the currents connecting two souls change direction. If we treat these changes as catastrophic failures of will or effort, our pain becomes disproportionate to the event itself. We assign too much weight to the concept of completion. The gentle pivot teaches us that goals are meant to be compass points, not destination markers cast in concrete. They should guide our current steps, but they must never dictate every possible future step. True mastery lies in maintaining a healthy tension, enough focused commitment to propel us forward, yet enough radical openness to accept the sudden necessity of veering off course. This skill is profoundly challenging because it demands a temporary suspension of self-pity and nostalgia for an imagined past stability. When we are deeply attached to how things should be, how a relationship used to feel, or what our professional life was supposed to look like 5 years ago, we build internal dams against the required flow. We find ourselves exhausted, not by external conflict, but by the sheer energy of fighting natural change. This resistance drains us until we are brittle and ineffective. The art of the gentle pivot requires a cultivated elasticity, an emotional musculature that can absorb shock without fracturing. It means recognizing the whisper of suggestion, the moment a planned action feels profoundly uncomfortable, or when a relationship starts requiring different energy than you feel capable of giving. Instead of resisting this discomfort with forceful insistence, we practice observation. We ask, why does this feel wrong? Is it truly wrong, or is it simply incompatible with who I am becoming in this current moment? Furthermore, the pivot must be applied to our expectations of others. Many times, our deepest disappointments stem not from their actions, but from our unwavering belief that they must remain consistent with a past pattern. We assume that because someone loved us strongly in the past, they are bound by invisible chains to maintain that same intensity forever. But people, like river water, are subject to external forces and internal evolution. They must change for themselves to continue moving forward. To expect others to be static is not love. It is a form of energetic self-betrayal. The emotional labor required here is immense. The ability to let go of two separate anchors simultaneously, the anchor to how we once were, and the anchor to how we wish others could remain for us. It takes courage to admit that good enough may look different today than it did yesterday. The strength lies in embracing this ambiguity. The gentle pivot, therefore, is an ongoing practice of alignment. It means watching the external circumstances, the relationships, the professional opportunities, the personal convictions, and instead of fighting the natural curve of change, you adjust your posture until you are flowing with the easiest and most powerful current. You move not in dramatic leaps or sudden ruptures, but in a series of subtle, decisive shifts that feel organic and inevitable. It is an active surrender, giving up the illusion of control to gain true power over responsiveness. It affirms that growth is rarely linear. It unfolds in elegant adjustments, gentle compromises, and profound pivots. And by mastering this art, we finally reconcile Heraclitus's deep wisdom with the practical reality of a long life lived among imperfect people and an unpredictable world. We realize that the greatest freedom is not found in remaining still, but in moving with intention through change itself. We have traveled this long road through the currents of change. We learn to observe the river without falling into it, recognizing that the self is not a solid rock, but rather a dynamic interplay with its own flow. We accepted the necessary friction, realizing that resistance was merely exhaustion in disguise. If chapters 12 and 13 taught us how to pivot gracefully, how to adjust our expectations of others or our plans for tomorrow, then this final stillness teaches us where to find stability at all, within the breath itself. This is not simply meditation. It is a radical act of presence, a return to the most immediate moment. It is living in flow state. The ancient wisdom points toward one inescapable truth that underlies all flux. Only the present moment possesses true substance. The past is memory, merely an echo, a pleasing or painful retelling, and the future is speculation, built on sand and anxiety. Both realms are illusions of permanence. To exist in the flow state means mastering this boundary. It requires us to anchor ourselves entirely to the breath, for the breath is the singular constant that defies our desire to fix it. Inhale, exhale. These simple movements tether us not to an event but to a rhythm. They demand nothing and promise nothing. They simply are. The mind, however, resists this simplicity with great force. It is built by narratives of before and after. When we try to focus on the breath, the mind immediately leaps into reflection. Was my breath deep enough? Am I thinking about breathing right now? This internal chatter is the ultimate form of resistance. It seeks to monumentalize a moment that is inherently unmonumental. It wants us to intellectualize the simple rhythm and trap ourselves in analysis. But this is precisely where the mastery lies. We must not fight the thoughts, nor judge them as failures of concentration. Instead, we treat them like clouds drifting across an immense sky, the sky being pure awareness itself. The thought comes. It informs us of our anxieties about time or attachment to outcomes. It passes, and we simply return our attention to the gentle ingress of the air, the soft release of the breath. The flow state is not a destination of quietude achieved after much effort. It is an organic alignment, a willingness to accept that awareness is movement. We are recognizing that being alive is inherently a process of continuous becoming. The calm we seek is not the absence of motion, but the comfort in maintaining our own internal rhythm regardless of external chaos. The breath becomes our unshakable point of reference. It is always happening right here, right now. When external life demands flexibility, when relationships pivot, when career paths shift, when perceived stability dissolves entirely, we return to this anchor. We remember that the deepest source of strength does not come from planning or forcing a result. It comes from maintaining composure within the inhale and the exhale. This is where our philosophical journey finds its practical resolution. The constant flow taught by Heraclitus was never meant solely for contemplation in an amphitheater. It must be lived moment to moment, like surfing one's own breath through a day of life's inevitable waves. To dwell only on the lesson or only on the philosophy is insufficient. We must inhabit the principle. The practice reveals that our deepest conflicts are almost always temporal. They are battles against what was, or longing for what might be. By anchoring ourselves to the breath, to the irreducible now, we dissolve the power of these attachments. We learn that moment by moment, we generate resilience not through sheer willpower, but through radical acceptance of the present reality. The flow state is therefore a profound merging of paradox. It is utter stillness found within maximum activity. It is total surrender coupled with supreme awareness. It means acknowledging the perpetual movement around you, the shifting desert sands, the changing moods of people, the inevitable decay and rebirth of all things, and choosing, consciously, to rest only in the steady pulse that measures your life. This return to the breath liberates us from the tyranny of permanence. It whispers that nothing needs to be held, nothing needs to be perfected, and yet everything can be lived fully and powerfully right now. We are perpetually becoming, yes, but we do so anchored by the steady rhythm of this single moment. We have spent this journey learning to navigate the ceaseless current of existence. From the rushing river that defines who we are passing through, to the subtle pivot required in our deepest relationships, we have consistently returned to a single truth. Nothing remains fixed. To believe otherwise is to live in contradiction with the fundamental nature of reality itself. It is this recognition of absolute impermanence, this acceptance of constant becoming, that represents the pinnacle of philosophical liberation. If life were somehow static, if the river ceased its rush and the smoke would simply hang motionless forever, we would lose our essence. Growth requires change. Meaning demands flux. The very act of living is the noble effort of becoming something else than what we were yesterday. To stop evolving is to cease existing. The deepest challenge, now that we have accepted this universal flow, is how do we redefine identity? If every thought passes like a ripple, if every emotion drifts away with the tide, and if even our bodies are simply arrangements of elements in perpetual exchange, what anchor remains for the self? The initial resistance was painful because it suggested that stability or permanence should be possible. We sought solid ground where only shifting sands existed. The wisdom derived from Heraclitus is not merely an observation of nature. It is a radical recalibration of the self. It asks us to stop defining ourselves by nouns and start describing ourselves by verbs. We are not fixed objects with unchanging properties, like statues carved in stone. We are processes. We are events. We are cycles of transformation. This shift requires an immense act of intellectual humility. The goal is no longer to find the one true self underneath the layers of change, for that self does not exist as a static core waiting to be found. Instead, we embrace the idea that the self itself is the ongoing process of observation and response, the consciousness witnessing the flow. Consider the human inclination toward narrative permanence. We build stories about ourselves. I am the failure. I am the loving partner. I am the diligent worker. These narratives feel solid. They grant us a sense of predictable selfhood. But when viewed through the lens of perpetual change, these narratives are revealed to be mere temporary consensus, elegant fictions that provide comfort but restrict freedom. To truly live in constant becoming is to treat your own inner story with radical detachment. When a difficult thought arrives, whether it is self-criticism or lingering guilt about yesterday, do not accept it as truth about who you are. See it merely as smoke rising from the ground, a beautiful, transient exhibition of energy that will dissipate into the sky. Observe its form, note its texture, and then allow it to pass without judgment or attachment. The consequence of this acceptance is freedom. It is a profound, exhilarating lightness. We stop carrying the heavy ballast of past selves. Yesterday's mistakes are not definitional. They are simply data points on the flow chart of your existence. They inform the current movement, but do not dictate its destination. This understanding fundamentally alters how we engage with struggle. The necessary friction that gave us such pain is understood now as life's primary engine, the mechanism by which becoming happens. Conflict, difficulty, change itself. These are simply pressure points, moments where the system demands a more sophisticated flow pattern. They are not enemies to be defeated. They are essential energy required for altitude and evolution. We must cultivate what we might call responsive readiness. This is not passive resignation, which suggests giving up effort entirely. Rather, it is an intensely alert posture, a state where you are perfectly receptive to the given moment while maintaining the capacity for rigorous action. It is like a dancer who never plans her next movement, but reacts instantly and powerfully to the music-changing rhythm before her. The constant becoming demands that we relinquish all expectations of predictable outcomes, including our own internal desires regarding happiness or success. If you anchor your sense of worth to a destination, a promotion, a perfect relationship, a settled state, you are making yourself vulnerable to disappointment because life cannot adhere to finite plans. The only reliable metric of value is the quality of your engagement with the immediate present. The deepest wisdom in this chapter, perhaps, lies in understanding that true mastery is an act of continuous yielding. It means being strong enough to endure the erosion and yet fluid enough not to resist it. We move from a belief system centered on being, who I am, to one centered entirely on becoming, how I am moving. To conclude this journey, remember that stability is found only in movement, the steady, rhythmic act of simply continuing. The universe does not seek stasis. It embodies perpetual dynamism. And by understanding ourselves as participants in that eternal motion, we are liberated from the tyranny of time and definition. We are welcomed into the flow, a continuous becoming under the overarching rhythm of existence itself. This realization